you're not giving it your all when you know you are. God hates divorce, but why? According to everybody I've asked and the scriptures that I've found, it's because it hurts people.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic community in true crime. Whoa, is Pastor John Paul innocent after all? In true crime, we have to think critically and follow the evidence. We also have to be careful not dismissing out of hand what the medical examiner says. Sometimes it's tough to keep an open mind. It's difficult to stay curious. When there's a situation like this with very little information and social media trying to fill the vacuum, well, we need to be cautious. The good news is the Robeson County Sheriff will release their full findings of the investigation on Tuesday, tomorrow, including a timeline along with their final conclusion. According to one article, quote, Sheriff Wilkins is asking for everyone to please await the full timeline of events before making assumptions and coming to conclusions. And that is according to the Sheriff Office, their Facebook, an official statement that they posted on Facebook. Now, what we do know from the Robeson County Medical Examiner, Dr. Richard Johnson, Mica Miller died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. There doesn't seem to be any uncertainty about that simply based on him giving that assessment. But the question is, how can they tell it's self-inflicted? Well, there are a couple of telltale signs. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the many of you who have subscribed. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. So what are a few potential indications if it's true, if Mica did take her own life, what would show that? What would be clear indicators of that? Well, there are a couple. Number one, was the firearm still present at the scene? 2, were her fingerprints on it? 3, was there gunpowder residue on her fingers? 4, did the gunshot wound correspond to her handedness? For example, if she was right-handed, it would need to be the right temple, and vice versa. Number 5, did the victim leave a note or some other kind of message or communique? Number 6, did the firearm belong to the victim? 7, was Mica going through a period of emotional struggle? Is there something we don't know regarding that aspect? And number 8, did someone hear the gunshot in the park and then find the victim soon after and no one else? Now, obviously, I don't know what's in the report, so this is speculation, but unlike some other true crime creators out there, I have written at least one book that interrogates this very subject, whether there's more evidence of murder or someone taking his own life. And guess who is the subject of that investigation? Vincent van Gogh. I dealt with this extensively in my book, The Murder of Vincent van Gogh. More recently, I've covered at least half a dozen British women who entered rivers at dawn or dusk. And in at least one case, it's clear the woman did so intentionally. There's even CCTV to prove it. What I can't help noticing is that all the British women I covered ventured into wooded, natural areas and disappeared. On the face of it, Mica also seems to have chosen a natural setting. If some of the British women chose rivers, perhaps they did so because they didn't have access to firearms. Did Mica have access to a firearm? This is a central question. Where does the firearm come from, and how does it enter the picture? Regarding the assertion that Mica was shot in the back of her head, that has now clearly and unambiguously been refuted by the coroner. Now, I have to say, on paper, Pastor John Paul still makes a very good fall guy. He seems to tick many of the boxes, and even his words and actions seem to condemn him. But what is the answer to the question we asked right at the beginning? Does he have an alibi? The answer seems to be yes. And although having an alibi doesn't necessarily rule out foul play, it significantly reduces the possibility. That said, I'm still not sure Pastor John Paul is out of the woods just yet. Now, according to an article in WSPA 7 News, quote, Sierra Francis said her sister told her that people were following her and indicated that her husband had hired people to follow her. The affidavit also alleges that John Paul transferred assets, including the deed to their home, to one of his sons and moved his wife's personal belongings from their home while she was undergoing treatment at a mental health facility, end quote. Now, although all of these aspects are legitimate, what we also have here is a concession that Mica was receiving treatment for mental health. If Mica's mental health was in trouble, it's clearly something we know very little about. It also seems as though some of John Paul's actions may have aggravated her mental health. It certainly doesn't seem like he made her feel, calmer and safer in a sense. So, in any event, do you see, we need to at least consider an alternative theory. And this feels wrong. It certainly does feel not like we are not doing justice to Mica by going down this path, because it feels like we are going down a path where we are blaming Mica for her own death. But that is not what we're doing. We're trying to ascertain, simple question, we're trying to ascertain if there's more evidence one way or another in terms of evidence pointing to foul play or something else. That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to follow the evidence. Where does the evidence lead? Well, when someone has an alibi, then you really do need to tread carefully. Lord knows there's a lot of smoke in many areas, and in many ways, the pastor comes across as certainly not the nicest person in the world. Whatever happened in this case, I think it's fair to say John Paul was an aggravating factor in the dynamic Mica experienced. And that's tragic. That's unfortunate. But just because she had a gripe against him, and it's a legitimate gripe, that doesn't mean he picked up a firearm and killed her. So I repeat, in true crime, we have to think critically. We have to follow the evidence. We also have to be careful not dismissing out of hand what the medical examiner says. Until now, I haven't verbalized a pretty obvious truth in this case, which is if the circumstances were building up to a climax in terms of murder, in terms of this divorce that was proceeding in a certain way, they were also potentially building up in another way. We can tell, for example, that Mica was conflicted about divorce and was struggling. And who knows, when she finally gave John Paul notice, and this was actually the second time, I think she'd previously gone through the divorce proceedings until February, when I think they decided to reconcile. I think maybe she hoped that he would have a change of heart. It's possible that she understood in some authentic way that she had lost everything and likely wouldn't be allowed to be part of the church either. And perhaps she found this to be devastating. Perhaps it was a hopeless realization. Perhaps she also realized she would lose the kids. They weren't her kids, and perhaps that was also something that was really troubling her. And so, perhaps not over a period of months or weeks, but suddenly, once the divorce papers had been received, perhaps she felt the house of cards crumble. This is something that can take place over a long period of time, and it can also happen quite suddenly. We can also see that Mica seemed to want to go to Africa, which suggests someone wanting to give up their entire life here in America to do what? To look after children in a faraway country. So that kind of suggests this idea of wanting to run away, in a way wanting to give up a particular life. One also has to wonder why Mica doesn't have children of her own. In any event, let's see what the full police report reveals when it comes out tomorrow. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.